This is not the formal program, but breakfast is served. So please help yourself. That's the important part. So, and feed yourselves, and then we can start on time and on. Okay, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, you are about to be blessed by what is on.
I say good. I, yeah, I say good. So I say good. Yeah, I say good. Kwabamnandi sikudlile sayixelana nendlela kwabaphansi sihambile kwabamnandi noma kubuhlungu bowaze and nothing lasts forever. I say good. Bye. Yeah, I say good. Bye.
You stay on my mind still. I'm in denial. Can't tell you how I feel. Why could you find? I'd redraw the lines. Like time after time, you'll be fine. Love to say you let me down. Tell you to the opposite again. Always hold me up and down. Always hard for me to pretend. I don't wanna say it. I just wanna go back to when you didn't feel I need to be back. So, you really wanna know. So, you really wanna know. So, you really wanna know. I'm the rainbow, the rainbow. I'm the rainbow, I'm the rainbow. I'm the rainbow, the rainbow. I'm the rainbow, so you will find the tears will dry, you will find. The tears will dry, so you will find. The tears will dry, you will find. The tears will dry. Da 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 That's un soluzione con la Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva. No mabuye na That's un soluzione con la Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva. No mabuye na That's un soluzione con la Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva, Nendelina viva. After the rain, after the rainbow, the rain, after the rainbow, after the rain, after the rainbow, the rain, after the rainbow. So you will find the tears will dry, you will find the tears will dry, so you will find.
Hi, Chloe, can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you well.
Oh, wonderful. Let me get back to the Zoom screen. Okay, great. Thank you so much
Sorry
for joining
that I
me.
didn't log in earlier. I've had quite a crazy week and I just got back from Brussels late last night.
Not a problem.
But
You're still here now.
it seems to
Um,
be working okay.
so, Chloe, please remember the slide that I shared with you yesterday.
Sorry?
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Let me get off here. Chloe, can you hear me now?
Yes, I do hear you.
Okay, wonderful. There's a slide, the one that I have here at the back. Please,
Yes.
can you put it as your background also? And one thing I was also going to ask you, are you going to have like a PowerPoint presentation?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so please can you share that with me so that I can share it with our tech team for them to project it while you present?
Okay, I will do that now. When does the actual event, I guess people are there in person, so they're not yet seated, or?
Yes, the people are here. It's currently being live streamed. The people are here in person. And it's gonna start at about 10 past to 9. Because
Okay.
there was some delays. So, do you have the program that
Yes,
I've
I do.
just? Okay, wonderful. So you're going to be presenting at what time? At 9:40, from 9:40 to 9:50.
Okay.
Okay, so just send me your PowerPoint presentation so I can share it with our ICS guys for them to project for you while you present.
I've
So you
just
can
sent it
remain
to you.
online. Okay, wonderful. Let me just check.
And
Okay, we see. Wait, no, that's the previous email you sent. So we do have the other guests that are going to be presenting online that have just joined, but then they left because they joined in at 7:30. So we test their mics and screen and everything at that time, and then they're going to come back on when it's almost their time to like present.
okay.
Yeah. So are you able to set your background?
I'm just doing that. It's in video settings.
Okay, so what you're going to do, you're going to save the file onto your desktop.
Yes,
And
I have
then
that.
once you've saved it, you're going to go to video here on Zoom. There's an arrow pointing up, and then you're going to choose virtual background. And then there's a plus sign at the right corner that you're going to see, and then add on the picture, add on the image from your files.
Backgrounds and effects. So in settings?
No, go to the video icon here on
Oh,
Zoom.
yes.
Yes, there's an arrow pointing up. Click on it and then choose virtual background on the option.
I'm not seeing it. Advanced?
So that was it for me. Oh, God.
Oh, here. Sorry, I'm it's really been a long week.
Where are you stuck? Where are you stuck so I can take you through?
No, I found it finally.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the School of Management, IT and Governance, we cordially welcome you all to today's business breakfast on the geopolitics of technology. A special welcome to the Deputy Director General in the Department of Communications and Technologies, Mr. Tinyeko Ngobeni. Please forgive me if I pronounce that incorrectly. And to our guests from AAA Pilots, as well as to our online participants joining us through the YouTube live stream. We gather here this morning as we explore one of the most critical intersections of our time, which is technology and global relations. This event is pivotal in an era where technological advancements are shaping our industries and the geopolitical landscapes. From AI to cybersecurity, blockchain to quantum computing, the innovations we witness today transform how nations interact, compete, and collaborate globally. As we examine these shifts, it's vital to consider the opportunities and risks they pose to international security and economic stability. We are fortunate to have distinguished speakers from around the globe with us today who will share their insights on these pressing issues. Their perspectives will give us a deeper understanding of how emerging technologies influence diplomacy, national security, and international policy. We encourage you all to actively engage in today's discussions, ask questions, and reflect on how the geopolitical forces behind technological advancements might impact your industries, organizations, and societies. Once again, welcome, and we look forward to an inspiring morning of learning and dialogue. I hand you over now to Professor Manoj Maharaj, who will facilitate the rest of the session.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My job is simple here. It's just to introduce the speakers and then leave it up to them to entertain you for the rest of the morning. But the geopolitics of technology is something critical in today's age. I mean, I think we all know, the role it's playing in the world today. I mean, the role technology plays in all aspects. And when we had this idea, to have this talk, we put the word out there, and we had so many people, high quality people, volunteering their time to spend with us, and we really appreciate that. Most importantly, for international speakers to give up their time to be available with us here this morning, and for our three colleagues to take the time to fly down at their own expense, I must add, to come and spend their time with us, and I think we really appreciate that. So, Dr. Kirupele from on the extreme left there, who's from the Department of Communications and Digital Technologies, Chief Director of Cybersecurity Operations there. And then we have Dr. Nishal Kushal, who's the CTO of Conlog, and he tells me he's Egyptian South African, and at the moment he's in Pretoria, but he's came down just for this talk today. And same with Mr. Lucien Pierce, an ex-UDW graduate, so from my old university. And so he's glad to be back in Durban, I'm sure. Who's never happy to be in a surrounding like this, of course. And Lucien is a partner at Pukibia, and I think there's another name there. Pukibia Attorneys, and he's an expert in the cybersecurity law. We also have Chloe Teven, who's going to join us online. She's from the European Union, who'll give us a European Union perspective. And then we have Ms. Nanj, let me get her name right, I've just got it on screen here. Nanjira Sambuli from Kenya, who's also joining us online, and she's a researcher and going to give us an African perspective. And we have Dr. Saroj Bishnoi from India, who's again also joining us online, and will give us a perspective on geopolitics from the Indian perspective and a global perspective. So, we're not going to take questions during the sessions. I'd like the speakers to all have their say, and then we'll have an open discussion afterwards. also have a list of questions that have come through online. I just want to ask, plead, beg. Question time is not speech time. We have the speeches up here. So make your questions quick and to the point so that we can get more questions in and give our speakers time to respond to them. Thank you very much. Kiru, over to you.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Manoj. So, can somebody just make sure the presentations I can see it here.
There we go.
So I just start? Yeah. Okay, so I'll start in the meantime. So as Manoj said, I'm at the Department of Communication and Digital Technologies. I do a couple of things around national cybersecurity, manage the national cybersecurity mandate. But part of what I do at the department is also I'm part of the South African delegation, interdepartmental government delegation to the United Nations, where a lot of the negotiations around cybersecurity, cybercrime, and artificial intelligence take place. And so my talk is based on my experiences at those sessions at the UN, and it is certainly just my experiences. They're anecdotal in nature, and they certainly don't represent, profound knowledge or theoretical framework. So they're just.
I think the Archimedean mirror writing.
Yeah.
I think you guys.
So that's kind of the background to my presentation. So I'm just going to go ahead in any case, right? Yeah. So, historically, we've always been able to kind of govern emerging technologies and transnational technologies and technologies that have a transnational impact. So, for example, the seminal example we use is from the 1600s. We call them Mara Classum, Mara Liberum. They are the laws of the sea that eventually became the laws that countries now adopt in terms of territorial waters and all those kinds of things. So those laws emerged from the 1600, right? Circa 1600. Moving on from there, we've had the telegraph. And from the telegraph emerged the International Telecommunications Union and ability to then to govern and regulate this global framework. I don't think I have control to move it though, right? Yeah, okay. So moving on from there, we have the telegraph. And then after the first two nuclear explosions in 1945, we have the partial test ban treaty in 1963, followed by the non-proliferation treaty, and then a host of other negotiations around nuclear power that have emerged and continue to emerge, right? Then we've got space, so Sputnik, the launch in 1957, first humans in space, and then we've had things like the Outer Space Treaty. So the point I'm making is that when we've had these transnational impacts, we've always been able to manage them, and we've always been able to kind of regulate them globally. Sorry, this is catching up with me. So when we talk then about emerging technologies, probably a couple of interesting things is that when it comes to emerging technologies, the current global digitally enabled era is probably the fastest period of innovation in history, right? With new technologies emerging, and advancing very, very rapidly. And you can see that from, ChatGPT and AI and things like that. But emerging technologies, platforms, and ecosystems, they can solve national problems, right? And global problems, but they also have the potential to reimagine the distribution of power. So north, south, east, west, whatever, right? We can reimagine the distribution of power using these emerging technologies, and that's really important. They also come with certain risks. So, for example, the ability to disrupt global stability, right? And one example, and we may touch on it later, is this piece of malware that was produced about 20 years ago called Stuxnet that managed to disrupt the Iranian capabilities, nuclear capabilities, and it changed the geopolitics of that entire region, right? So the ability to disrupt is really important. What's important around this innovation is that developing countries are almost always adopters of technology. When we do develop, we almost always give away the IP and we re-import that kind of finished product. That is uneven pace of technological adoption may further widen with the existing technological divide between developed and developing countries. So it's really important to take, and if you had to look around the room and kind of figure out how many of us use ChatGPT and not, and there's possibly a kind of digital divide emerging within this room, right? Certainly at the university it happens, certainly within my work environment it happens. So with this in mind, digital technologies become increasingly impacts the way countries make decisions, not these sovereign decisions. And it expands the range of people that can actually influence political action, right? And with corporations and individuals becoming more and more powerful. And probably one of the best examples is one of our best exports, which is Elon Musk, right? The ability to reach 200 million people with one tweet, right? And people follow him and people listen to him. And I think it's probably one of our better exports, right? So, and so these emerging technologies also pose ever-evolving national security risks, right? And I think Lucian's going to touch on Starlink and the way Starlink was used in the Ukraine conflict. So as a consequence, these emerging technologies have become the focus of national governments and of global institutions, right? And they also pose several challenges to diplomacy in that they deal with multiple domains, right? They have diverse applications, like AI has diverse applications, and potentially numerous policy implications, right? The slides haven't caught up yet. So to assess the impact of these emerging technologies, you need to have a broad understanding of these technologies. You need to understand the implications on society before you can actually regulate and make policy, right? And there's a risk, without being disparaging to policymakers, but they may not have sufficient time or knowledge to actually comprehend these emerging technologies and the possible economic and social impact, right? So we've got a group of people that are able to regulate and maybe not fully understanding. So we come to then digital diplomacy. And one of the important things to understand is that studies of geopolitics have always centered around the corridors of trade, right? Who controls them, how they have played a major role in actually shaping the very foundation of the economies. And that picture there is probably relevant in that that first picture is around the trade routes and seafaring routes from the 1700s. And the bottom one is more around internet cables now and the way that kind of connectivity, right? And you can see there's a kind of match to them. So whilst diplomacy is often characterized as traditional in nature, it is imperative that it continuously adapts to an ever-changing world, right? So in this context, then digital diplomacy refers to the negotiations about digital policy issues that take place with nation states and in multiple, global forums. It's going to become increasingly important when more and more economic, social, and political activity revolves around issues of technology. There's a quote from the UN Secretary General that says, and he was talking about the impact of the World Bank, the IMF, and he said, the financial architecture which does not represent today's world is at risk of leading to its own fragmentation, and this is the important part, where in a world where geopolitics is in itself a factor for fragmentation, right? So geopolitics is supposed to be something that we kind of bring together, but it's become a factor for fragmentation. So the next slide is fairly important if I could have shown it, and it shows all of the institutions around which negotiations take place, but we'll see if I manage to pop it up later. I'm going to stop now, but there's maybe 3 tech case studies that I think are important. And the first one is this power of technology companies and the people that kind of control them. So the market capitalization of Apple is 2.1 trillion, which is bigger than the GDP of many countries, right? Dollars. So it's probably it's bigger than the GDP of our country, which is around 7 trillion rand. Right? The second is emerging chip wars that I call them, the wars between US and China around silicon chips. And it influences things like the very existential threat to Taiwan, right? And you see all of these geopolitics happening around Taiwan. I'm sure you have them.
Send it now.
Okay. All right. So maybe just to go back to this issue around emerging technologies, back to that part of what I was talking about. And there's one thing that's probably very illustrative of this impact of emerging technologies is that the Nobel Prize for physics and for chemistry were awarded to people who are working with things around AI, right? So it's a technology-based kind of research that we're doing, and that's physics and chemistry. The Nobel Prize for Economics was given to 3 people for a book or kind of research they wrote around why nations fail. But those 3 of those 2 also wrote this very important book called Power and Progress. They talk about emerging technologies and the history of technology and the impact, right? So just kind of illustrate this thing about emerging technologies and sovereign decisions. So here then is a slide I wanted to show. Here, and I've tried to capture it, and there's a lot more, where all the negotiations happen around cybersecurity, cybercrime, emerging technology, AI, transnational data flows, future of work, and all those kinds of things. And there's a plethora of organizations, all the way from the United Nations to G20, G7, BRICS, African Union. There's the ITU that looks around things of telecommunications. There's lots of civil society and big policymakers in terms of Apple and Microsoft and all those kinds of things. We've got international finance organizations, IMF, World Bank, African Development Bank. If you're following the news, there's a big spat between South Africa and SADC about who will be the next head of the African Development Bank. You have trade regimes like the WTO, the ILO, something called a Wassenaar arrangement around the dual use of technology. So there's a whole lot of things where these negotiations are taking place, right? So for me, then, the sweet spot is this traditional politics, these emerging technologies, and I'm stuck in cyberspace there because it's like it's akin to being the internet and all the things that happen there. And I think the sweet spot for me is where these 3 intersect, and that's what I consider the geopolitics of technology or digital diplomacy. And the 3 use cases I think are important is around emerging technologies, AI and innovation, the power of big tech companies, and I'll run through them really quickly. This whole issue around Huawei, this Chinese manufacturer of 5G equipment and why that's so important and what I call the chip wars. So Manoj, I won't be long, just a couple of seconds. So big tech, right? So tech giants have exploded in value. Apple's market cap is about 2.1 trillion, like I said. But there's a group of companies called the Magnificent Seven, right? They Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, that are generally considered the tech stocks that you must have. And if you had invested in Nvidia, for example, right, a couple of years ago, you invested $100, you'd probably be a millionaire, right? That's how much that stock has gone up in the last 5 years. And Nvidia is the maker of all of these new chips, right? But what it means is that these companies have enormous power to influence negotiations. So if you go to the UN and you're sitting there and you government to government negotiations, you have Microsoft piping up and saying, kind of trying to influence policy, right? And I'm not picking on Microsoft, but big tech, right? And big tech has a fiduciary duty to their stakeholders. So what they are promoting is almost always some kind of policy regime that's of interest to them. That's the one kind of chip, case study. The second one is this chip wars, this Silicon Valley, these silicon chips that emerged from Silicon Valley in the 1960s. And particularly there's a company called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, that sits in Taiwan. And they have a lot of the capability around chips, and that capability is really important to the global supply chain. And part of this whole choose my words carefully here, this issue of who controls Taiwan, whether it's an independent country, whether it belongs to mainland China, centers around this issue of this chip making capacity that TSMC has. The third case study is Huawei and 5G. 5G is this technology that gives us many business cases in terms of electronic vehicles and remote medicine and all those kinds of things. But Huawei generally seems to have the advantage when it comes to that. This is a company that spends the most amount on R&D, I think, globally. It is a leader in 5G technology. And there's a little spat going on. There's a trade war between the US and China, where US is saying is not using Huawei equipment in the telecom supply chain and asking other countries not to because of some security issues, right? So that's also kind of underpins the trade war. And then there's AI, right? All of us talk about AI, and it'll be, there isn't a presentation nowadays that doesn't talk about AI, but we need to consider this digital divide that's emerging around AI. So those, I think, are the three case studies for me that underpin this concept of digital diplomacy, technology, and politics. And yeah, I'm going to leave it there and hand over to the rest of my colleagues.
Yeah. So thank you, Kiran. Apologies for that technology issues. So our next speaker is Ms. Nanjira Sambuli. She's joining us from Kenya. Tech guys, are we all ready for her? Nanjira? I can see her there. Right, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Manoj, and good morning, all. I hope you can hear me okay. And I think Dr. Kira has set up what I was going to, my remarks quite well, so I'll just pick up from where he left off. First, by just acknowledging again and reiterating that clearly technology has become a battleground in the geopolitical quest for power. These emerging technologies that he was speaking about have sharpened the reality of technologies being both an object and driver of international cooperation and competition. Now, these global tech rivalries tend to be categorized as between countries promoting liberal and human-centric governance models and against those deploying technology to support authoritarianism and other countries sort of sitting at the fence. And this is reshaping the world as we know it. The main techno-geopolitical axis is the Sino-American competition. That's China-American competition rivalry, from AI and chips to clean tech and critical emerging technologies. It's also manifesting, as we've heard from Dr. Kiro and his experience with the diplomacy realm, in the cyber domain. And we see this particularly in the negotiations towards the UN Cybercrime Treaty, in spheres of intellectual property, digital trade, digital connectivity, infrastructure, and other domains. The EU, the European Union, in this fight, so to speak, tends to frame itself as a normative and regulatory superpower, with regulations like the Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, having had a significant effect on how data protection regulation is done globally, what is also known as the Brussels effect. The geopolitics of tech is also pushing what are called middle powers, especially into industrial policies to shore up their economies in the era of digital. We see this markedly in countries like India, Brazil, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and others who are making significant investments to this end. Africa overall is playing at the edges, yet is an underrated factor and actor in the global tech competition. So I think the first thing to really, sort of underline here is that the geopolitics of tech is bringing to bear the reality that the technological is deeply political. And it's making concepts like governance of digital and emerging technologies, as well as digital sovereignty or strategic autonomy, salient concerns in international relations and global governance today. And because, as again, we've heard, the developers of these technologies are predominantly private sector players, it is also challenging the multilateral international order with calls for multi-stakeholder governance models growing louder and a proliferation of multiple initiatives, including mini-laterals pertaining to digital technology and experimentations with global tech governance. Now, I want to shift to focus on Africa and its place in the geopolitics of tech. Despite being the least connected region to the internet and the African digital transformation is a frontier of the geopolitics for digital technologies. There's a lot of interest globally in Africa's digital potential, as well as in the possibility to fast track its pace, the idea of leapfrogging and tapping into the continent's market of over 1 billion people. As markets especially saturate in the East and West, tech giants from these economic blocs believe that emerging frontiers in Africa and elsewhere in the global South present lucrative opportunities to consolidate their domestic base and broaden their global footprint. To that end, many competitors seek to pitch their digital products to African markets and grab as large a share of them as possible. I want to speak now to 4 main frontiers of geopolitics of tech in Africa. The first is infrastructure. And this infrastructure angle plays to both the connectivity infrastructure of digital and age-old brick and mortar infrastructure. We've seen initiatives like China's Digital Silk Road, which is created as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. The United States response to it, which was originally called the Build Back Better World, and now has been consolidated under the G7 as the Partnership on Global Infrastructure and Investment, the European Union's Global Gateway, all setting their sights on Africa's digital spaces as a frontier for the geopolitics of tech. These frameworks contain commitments towards Africa's digital transformation goals, and they exist alongside others by multilateral actors like the World Bank and its digital infrastructure moonshot for Africa, the United Nations Giga Enterprise, which also aims to connect schools across the continent or to the internet, among many others. We also see private sector-led connectivity initiatives, especially like Google's Equiano project that will run more than 12,000 kilometers across West Africa once completed, and Meta's 2 Africa initiative, which will be the longest subsea cable in the world once completed. Then we're seeing investments now in other infrastructure like data centers, including notable partnerships such as between Microsoft and G42 in the UAE, who are planning a $1 billion green data center in Kenya that is to run on 100% renewable geothermal power. And in South Africa, we've seen how Amazon's cloud service has set its sights to invest up to 30 billion rand by 2029. The other frontier is on critical minerals. And here, this is powered by the urgency to transition to renewable energy globally, as well as the surge in demand for chips to power AI technologies. Now that these have brought these critical minerals into the center of tech competition, notably between China and the US, and is playing out very significantly in Africa because it's home to sizable reserves of these minerals. So significant, in fact, are these minerals that even the US and the EU, who have historically not invested in brick and mortar infrastructure to the scale that China has with BRI in Africa, is now leading a partnership to rejuvenate a 1,300-kilometer Lobito Corridor railway line from the shared border between the DRC and Zambia through Angola to the Atlantic Ocean. And then Zambia is again also involved on the east coast of Africa in a partnership with Tanzania and China to refurbish a 50-year-old Tazara railway line to offer cargo transport from Zambia's copper and cobalt mines through the Indian Ocean. While this rush to access and export these minerals continues, so too are African demands to have more value addition occurring on the continent. For example, Nigeria has very notedly proclaimed this year that it will only grant mining licenses for lithium, for example, to companies that present plans on how these minerals will be processed locally under guidelines that they are developing. And this this demand for value addition is also opening up another interesting theater where even middle powers like Japan, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are gearing up to invest in developing the supply chains of these minerals in Africa. For example, again, Zambia, DRC, and Namibia have been negotiating with Japan on this, in part to counter Chinese outsized influence in the continent's mining industry. The UAE, Saudi Arabia are also motivated by an interest to diversify their economies away from fossil fuels and are investing heavily in this space. Russia, India, South Korea are others also who have been, courting Africa significantly on this front. We heard also about AI, and I'll just speak to shortly to this, in that one of the most significant assets Africa has to offer in this AI competition aspect of it is raw materials. And in this case, alongside minerals is data. Now, this is data about us, data generated by us in our daily life activities, and the global AI machinery is hungry for data to have an edge on their competitors. And it's very important to mention that this data extends to our bodies. So our genetic data in particular is a theater for serious competition. And it's also about our diverse historical, cultural, socioeconomic, and political pasts and presents. Now, in both the quest to build foundational AI models of our own and to better regulate how our data is incorporated into existing ones, is that foundational play that data is a strategic asset and how Africans' interests will be protected, whether it's been building our own or incorporating into the global machinery, is a very important consideration. The fourth and last aspect I want to mention is on policy and regulation, because there's a serious contest to also shape Africa's normative frameworks, policies, and regulations for the digital era. Here I'll mention, and maybe Chloe will also speak to it, is Team Europe, for example, which means the European Union, its member states, their public development banks, and their implementing agencies have invested heavily in shaping the normative and regulatory instruments in Africa that we will rely on for the governance of digital technologies. This is notably under the umbrella of the AU-EU partnership, which Europe likes to state is one of equals, a partnership of equals, though reality will prove otherwise. Also, we see, actors like the US and other European countries investing in technical assistance and capacity building on issues like cyber diplomacy and governance issues of cyberspace and digital technologies. Meanwhile, continental-led efforts such as the African Union Convention on cybersecurity and personal data protection have barely received the respective member states' political will to harmonize cyber and data protection legislature that has resulted in this fragmented and divergent legal framework domain that increases the cost of burden and compliance when doing business in Africa. In fact, South Africa only just signed the convention recently, for example. Now, we also see capacity building for multiple actors in the African space, and especially government and civil society occurring as a way of sort of helping shape this normative idea of how we think and how we speak about these issues. Now, how all these affect or direct our continental ambitions like Agenda 2063 and the realization of the continental free trade area, our science, technology, and innovation investments is a serious contestation as a result of this. And here, bearing in mind, for example, that Africa's growing presence in the G20 and now G21, which has emerged as a major forum for tech governance deliberations, with South Africa's presidency coming up, just as the AU has taken a seat at the table, we must ask ourselves what will be projected as South Africa's or Africa's techno-geopolitical posture, if any? Will we see pronouncements akin to the ones we've seen on climate, and for example, the African Green Industrialization Initiative that has been initiated by Kenya? Will it carry on the topic of digital public infrastructure that has been tagged Tech for the Global South, that was initially championed by India through its G20 presidency and has carried on to the Brazilian presidency with a customization to the Brazilian context? Big question being, will Africa influence or be influenced on its own agenda and subsequent investments, policy frameworks, and regulatory thrusts. So as I conclude, is to say that at stake is this so-called fourth industrial revolution, and if, when, and how Africa will participate in or be swept over by its disruptive effects. Big questions emerging are: how can Africa benefit from these geopolitical shifts that are affecting the tech sector? How can African countries secure their digital interests, given that most of them lack sovereignty over the digital infrastructure their countries use? How can Africa's strategic autonomy in individual countries and as a continental bloc be pursued? Most of the advocacy on the geopolitics of tech in Africa tends to focus on governments and intergovernmental entities like the African Union and the regional economic communities. And this is valid because we need to see our public sectors shape policies that are cognizant of digital and emerging technologies, as well as their enablers like access to energy and education, and how these all have economic, political, social, and cultural implications for the continent. But most of the action to make Africa a player in this space happens in the realm of innovation. How the continent is nurturing, fostering, and supporting homegrown entrepreneurship and innovation to grow, scale, and sustain is a critical factor in ensuring that Africa isn't just a pawn in the global geopolitical theater. The policies, laws, regulations, and public investments that respective countries will make, and the synergies or lack thereof on the continental level, are and will continue to affect the chance Africa has to be a veritable player in this global chess of geopolitics of tech. After all, as the proverb that we have in many African languages says, when elephants or bulls fight, it's the grass that suffers. We have to make sure that Africa is not just the grass upon which these giants will trample. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nanjira. It brings to mind that when Africa was called the Dark Continent, the global superpowers just ignored Africa. And now that it is a source of so much of raw materials and, of course, data, Africa is suddenly in the limelight. And I think the points made by Nanjira are important, and Kiru as well earlier on, is that we need to be cognizant of this and protect our people. Our next speaker is Dr. Nishal Kushal. Nishal, please join us. Thank you.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, and just to be politically correct, all of the associated genders and artificial intelligences within the room as well. Good morning. We have a pretty amazing topic today, good people, the geopolitics of technology. And there's a lot of parallels and congruences which go with that. It's an expansive topic, but I'd like to believe that one of the contributive and takeaways that we're going to have as a collective group of experts is, what do we do and how do we manage ourselves as experts, as industry leaders, as people who can influence policy? What do we do in order to move towards a better beneficiation model for our economic sphere, for our corporate sphere, and indeed for our regional South African sphere? So my intention here today, ladies and gentlemen, and it's on the back of quite a lot of interesting intellectual capital which will be shared by all of our colleagues, is to stimulate and thought-provoke within a certain direction so far as the geopolitics of technology is concerned. One of the things that I'd like to put forward to all of us as a collective audience, rapidly emerging technology, that sentimentality, it's quite an interesting one. And let's talk about our reality and where we find ourselves in right now. Technology, by its very essence, has been evolving since 1950. And I wonder how many of you actually know this. 1950 was actually the advent of artificial intelligence. And yet, in the current day and age, it is sensationalized. What do you think are the variables that have exponentially incremented the value proposition of things like artificial intelligence? The rapid evolution of our technological landscape. So Let's talk about geopolitics of technology in particular. When we say geopolitics, I'm thinking about two elements here. We all understand and we all know that we have a global political landscape. And commodities that are derivative within industry respond to the global political landscape. But let me contribute this to all of you as experts. The technological landscape is actually one of the few commodities which is compelling the political landscape. Now that's quite interesting, right? We have a geopolitical landscape. We have an arena of what politics are defined as. We have our first world, third world, emerging markets, etc. And yet we sit in a segue when it comes to technology, where technology itself is compelling political narrative, is compelling policy, is compelling governance. So when we talk about the geopolitics of technology, I'd like us to expand our consciousness to acknowledge that what we have here and the day and age that we find ourselves in, our technological reality, is most certainly something unique. We're in a bit of a crossroads so far as where to from here is concerned. The geopolitical landscape is going to be responsive to the technological landscape. And it's very few commodities that compel the political landscape. We'll dive into that a little bit more, but I thought, let me just introduce that as a concept. And let me move on to the next concept, which is also somewhat of a technological reality we find ourselves in. How many of you here don't own a cell phone? That's a funny question, isn't it? As a matter of fact, it's a laughable question. And yet, 30 years ago, it will be a laughable question in the other way. Why would you carry around a brick? 30 years from now, how many of you are not neurologically chipped? A bit of a ridiculous notion right now, isn't it? Of course, we understand the socioeconomic implications as well as the cultural implications of such a move right now. And we definitely are mulling over it as a collective consciousness, both from a geopolitical point of view as well as a cultural and ethical point of view. Most certainly we are. And yet within 30 years, it's going to be quite intriguing. Do you as a collective audience know that it was an ethical consideration for us to set up cellular phone towers? The exposure of young adults as well as the next generation to radiation was an ethical concern. And yet, in this day and age, most certainly after a lot of governance, a lot of incubation in the right direction, so far as safety protocol is concerned, we find ourselves in another reality, don't we? Biotechnology, artificial intelligence. How many of you here understand the notion of platform economy? Great. How many of you here believe that you're not part of a platform economy? And let me define what platform economy means. We have a very interesting technological microcosm that certain companies, to the likes of Uber, to the likes of YouTube, to the likes of Instagram, have literally their own microeconomy. You have an economic benefication, you have a social landscape, you have actually a political landscape of how you interact as a digital citizen within that technological space. Now, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that means that we all are somewhat of digital citizens as well. Right? So that is a secondary reality of the technological landscape that we find ourselves in. And I want us to think about what is the purpose and why are we all sitting around this particular topic, the geopolitics of technology. It is relevant, it is pertinent, and it does influence quite a lot of what we are doing and what we intend on doing. I think part of what I wanted to highlight to the esteemed audience is the whole notion of evolving technology and also its effect on governance and global influence. Since we are talking geopolitics, let's expand the notion of geography. How many of you here have been exposed to multinational policy, to multinational antagonisms that have spoken to, for example, data transmission, that have spoken to some technological concept within your daily life, within your corporate life? Let me throw a case study out to you, good people. We had a computer forensics investigative case that was particularly political in nature. And there was a concern around data transmission between jurisdictions. Now, that's quite intriguing because we are sitting in a space where we all have to acknowledge that technology is an enabler of interconnectivity, of the next progressive view of what humanity has to evolve with and to. And we are sitting with certain oppositions and antagonisms. In a summary, how many of you understand and know what the POPI Act is? Papaya/Poppy? Hands up. Very good. How many of you know what PIA is? How many of you want to challenge the difference between papaya and PIA in the sense of how they are antagonistic legislative frameworks? That's quite intriguing, right? Now, what am I trying to prove and what am I trying to put forward to you as a collective audience is that we have to be very cognitive and we have to be very aware of our evolving landscape. Something as malleable, as potentially volatile as technology, and having it locked down by legislative frameworks, that's quite an intriguing notion. I don't doubt, as a forensics expert, that as a collective consciousness, as a society, as an economy, we need frameworks. We need to ensure that ethics is at our core. We all understand that within the South African landscape, how important ethics is, right, good people? So most certainly, there's a need for framework, but let's consider what has happened in the European nations. The over-legislative landscape of the technological sector has reached a point where it is not considered a tangible player within the emerging technological market. That's a controversial statement, isn't it, good people? Europe is a compliance powerhouse, and we are sitting in a situation where there's been a lot of media sensationalism around the fact that if you have to look at the current day technological entrepreneur, the inclination of a technological entrepreneur wouldn't be Eurocentric necessarily. Why? Because of the rigid compliance landscape. So what I'm inviting here is a provocation of thought that when we are looking at something as malleable and volatile as technology, we have to look at it with all eyes open to ensure that whatever we are doing it with the sentimentality of the progressive nature of technology. Whatever we regulate, whatever we actually statuetize, should be done with the intention of entrenching ethics in the right direction. How many of you here have watched Terminator? How many of you here know why I'm bringing that up? Artificial intelligence, right? A lot of people have the sensational mentality of where artificial intelligence is going. What would stop that? How about a thought provocation on the basis of the preservation of humanity and ethics? That's a quite intriguing notion, and it's a subject for another forum. But for the time being, I would like to invite all of you to consider this. If we are talking about the geopolitical landscape, there has been lessons learned from certain jurisdictions. I'm going to summarize literally a few. And the summary here is done on the compulsion of where are we sitting at globally? As an investor, as a potential contributor of venture capital, and as a potential entrepreneur on the technological landscape, how do we weigh where best to fit ourselves in the geopolitical sphere? And why would certain places be good? So we're sitting with China, for example. There is a policy in play the HNTE, the High and New Technological Enterprise Incentive Program. Pretty good, pretty good. 15% tax rate base. And these are all facts which you good people can check online. We're looking at the United States. United States, which talks about the Helpful Incentive Production Semiconductors Program, CHIPS, literally called CHIPS, the creating help for the incentives and increased production. Billions in the attraction strategy so far as technology is concerned. India, fintech, leaders so far as contributive conceptualization of the app-based fintech landscape is concerned. MSIPs, a policy that drops down taxation as well as provides a 6% cash incentive base. The EU, they are right now trying to move away from the over-legislative environment into a more expansive view for incentivization. So, in a nutshell, what are we saying here? What we're saying is that from a geopolitical point of view, South Africa can take away a lot of lessons from how do we incubate the technological drive, from how do we evolve ourselves as a technological powerhouse. I would invite all of you to even look at what the more progressive and questionably third worlders like in the form of Malaysia are doing right now. A 0% tax base so far as technological investment is concerned. That's quite ridiculous. And yet it is slated, the Malaysian landscape, to be one of the more emerging forward thinkers within the chips manufacturing spaces above China within the next 7 years. So intriguing, good people. Let me conclude by saying that in our technological landscape right now, we acknowledge that there's a lot of geopolitical flux. We acknowledge that technology as a commodity of itself is compelling global policy to leverage and to ensure that we are in a space as leverages of new emerging technologies. Data between all of us is power, and knowledge is what is derived from that powerful data. We have a responsibility as a collective expert group around the table to ensure we move ourselves forward on a basis of integrity, ethics, always keeping in mind the future evolution of where we want to land and ensuring a better benefication socioeconomically for ourselves. Thank you, good people.
Thank you, Nishal. You speak of the digital, Kiru spoke about this when he started off as well. And he mentioned the book Power and Progress. I think if you have a chance, read it. It speaks to the technology accelerating or driving a deeper divide rather than bringing people together, those that have and have nots, etc. And that's something that Nishal has sort of touched on as well, and has as Nanjira. And I think, interestingly, now we're going to hear what Chloe has to say as the first person outside of Africa, if you will, and to see what she has to say in terms of the European Union's, and I've got a title over here, how the EU is approaching geopolitics of technology in the current moment, and how this is playing into EU-AU and Europe-Africa relations. And that talks right to exactly what our previous three speakers have talked about. Chloe? Yeah, here we go, Chloe. Welcome.
So hello, everybody. I did have a presentation, but I'm not sure if it, I think it was shared earlier. Otherwise, I can perhaps bring it up. But I think that this is a perfect moment to segue into this because I think we've just been speaking about the fact that the EU has perhaps over-regulated and is not by any means the leading power when it comes to emerging technologies today. So actually, I wanted to touch a little bit on this question of how the Brussels effect, which was so much celebrated in the EU in recent years as being the EU's contribution to technology geopolitics, is actually losing way at the moment as we start to really discuss the notion of technology sovereignty more and more, and how the EU can actually fight back against a model of digital development that has been very much imported from the US and that is seen as very much undemocratic and not in line with European values. So I think it's a little bit more complicated now than a question of the Western democracies versus China and the more autocratic nations, because I think the discourse in Europe has actually started from very much from the Snowden revelations that our allies in the US were spying on European leaders, and that really kickstarted a conversation about digital sovereignty in Europe. So I want to talk a little bit about the past few years and the focus on regulating big tech and how that has played out then on the global stage, and then move to the current moment where there is this growing focus on industrial policy across the global north. And as has been alluded to already, these questions around much more around the who owns the infrastructure, where are the value chains, and questions around ownership of the actual technologies and the infrastructure itself. So really what we've seen in recent years, as has been alluded to in Europe, has been this hyper focus on regulating big tech with multiple measures following on from what was seen as the success of the GDPR and its global influence. More recently, the focus has been on regulating the platform economy with the Digital Markets Act, focused on competition with the Digital Services Act that focused on content moderation and on trying to remove harmful content, with the AI Act that was looking to regulate AI before, just as it was emerging as a major technology on the market. But we've also seen the beginnings of an industrial policy strategy in Europe. And as already alluded to, the chip wars that the US has been so much focused on have also been a focus in Europe, where there's a consciousness that only 10% of chips globally, and most of those quite basic memory chips, are actually being produced in Europe. So there were a host of different strategies and acts trying to also focus on, for example, the data strategy, trying to build a data market in Europe and build common data spaces to drive innovation in the data economy, the EU Chips Act, the beginnings of an AI innovation strategy. But this is all this all played into also the EU's approach on the global stage. And I think we're all aware of this question of how GDPR has been kind of the EU's great contribution to those conversations. But I think the conversation is starting to move on globally. There's more and more focus on alternative ideas in terms of how do we promote, Japan promoted the idea of data free flow with trust, which could be an approach that the EU so far has been a bit slow to move forward on, because it's still holding GDPR up as the gold standard. But I think we need to, moving forward, be able to think outside the box and think with particularly other democracies around the world about how to approach this question of ensuring strong data protection, but also allowing data to be shared in a trustworthy manner, and working with others, particularly to ensure that for researchers and for the research community globally, that data is able to be shared easily. In recent years, there's also been a stronger focus in the EU on digital diplomacy. There was a sense that we had dropped the ball when it came to global fora like the ITU, that I think the Europeans were very much shocked and taken aback when China and Huawei began proposing new ideas at the ITU. And in recent years, there's been an effort to actually work together much more effectively at the ITU and to build a common agenda in a way that was not the case before. And I think there's a lot more coordination happening amongst European diplomats. Also globally, with the Global Digital Compact, for example, there was an effort to really have a common position and to push very much for certain language and certain ideas in that document. At the same time, the EU is adopting a more defensive approach, and I think this has potential ramifications also for its partners in that there's a very strong focus on economic security and ensuring that critical technologies are not leaked beyond our borders. And that I think will see research partnerships becoming more complicated in the current geopolitical context. And of course, there is the Global Gateway, which, as many of you probably know, is not very much of anything just yet, but is the EU's effort to compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative, including notably in Africa, and to focus and has this very strong focus on safe, secure, and resilient infrastructure, by which it means that there is a very strong focus on cybersecurity and on trying to cut Chinese manufacturers out of supply chains, basically, when it comes to European funded projects. Because in the past, there was a sense that Europe was actually funding a lot of Chinese projects also, as well as China building. I think, as already alluded to, there's also this strong focus on governing data, and there's a big data initiative that the EU has been, and Team Europe have been working on with the AU and with a number of African countries, supporting countries like Senegal and Ghana in developing their data strategies. And there are questions there around the kind of the influences that the undue influence perhaps that the EU is having through that cooperation. And I think there's a big question around not just the EU always pushes the idea that it's promoting a democratic model of digital governance. But I think that one important thing that we lose along the way is the fact that democracy is also about the process, and that policies need to be adapted to local contexts and need to include local stakeholders. So very quickly, at the current moment, we really see a very lively debate in Europe around controlling the whole technology stack, and trying to build a democratic model of technology development. And I don't feel that there is a coherent vision within the European Commission or within any member states at the moment, but certainly within the civil society and think tank community, there is a very lively conversation happening. And this is echoed also on the global stage around what is the tech we want, what kind of model of technology development could actually allow the EU to compete with the major technology powers. And this has led to a very strong focus on open source technologies, because the feeling is that any European tech champion that has emerged has basically been bought up by big tech in the past. So if the EU wants to actually ensure that technologies remain democratically governed and and democratically owned, then there needs to be a much stronger focus on open source technologies and on the governance models for these technologies. And that's particularly relevant with the emerging conversations around AI, which is, of course, a strong focus at the moment. So maybe just to end on kind of what I think are some of the global conversations that the EU should be engaging more with at the moment. I think the focus on the Brussels effect is perhaps not the right one going forward. And there is a need to think a lot more about process as opposed to pushing for this one end goal, which I think very soon is going to have been bypassed by the rate of technology change. So I think that there's a lot of space for further conversations around what does data free flow with trust mean in practice, and could we look at smaller examples in terms of testing, more global approaches to data spaces, for example, more global approaches to this idea of data free flow. There's been a lot of conversation as well about the idea of a CERN for AI. And again, I think at the moment, the EU is very focused on the idea of building compute capacity within the EU for the EU innovation system, and on building an internal data market that would provide the data sets that are necessary. But moving forward, could there be the potential to work with others around something more global in nature that could really be impactful in terms of achieving the kinds of global goals that we've signed up to recently with the Global Digital Compact? So I'm going to leave it at that for now, but I look forward to the further conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chloe. It's an interesting point you made, and I think Kiru touched on it as well, is that, overregulation, not overregulation, but strong regulation also stifles innovation. So I think you're going to find that there's going to be another kind of divide where countries that allow innovation without regulation will probably have, I don't know, right? Nishal used the example of Malaysia, for example. And there's another point that came to mind while I was sitting there. I belong to something called the Space Nation, Asgardia. It's a space nation. It's totally virtual. It exists openly. There's got 1,500,000 residents. And there's also Earth 2, which is a virtual Earth. What happens to those entities as they advance? So the Space Nation has its own parliament, has its own constitution, and what's going to stop Musk from putting up data centers out in space? Who then controls that? He controls it totally itself. So these are things to think about. But yeah, that's for the discussion. Lucien, over to you. Thank you very much. And Lucy's going to talk about digital sovereignty and leads on nicely from what Chloe was talking about as well. Thanks, Lucien.
Morning, everyone. Great to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Manoj, UKZN. Being a lawyer, I better start with a disclaimer. The views expressed today are not, I'm kidding. So I'm going to talk from a really practical perspective. When I was invited, I thought back to my entry into the tech sector around 2000, when I registered at Strathclyde University for a really excellent LLM in IT and telecoms law. And at that time, I knew nothing about the internet and barely started using it. And I remember reading, and you must excuse me because you can go and research it and confirm it yourself, but I might have been hallucinating. But at the time, I remember reading that all the world's internet traffic at that point, or very early on in the internet, went through 12 servers somewhere in the United States. And if I'm wrong, well, maybe it's 10 servers. But if you go and check nowadays, about 70% of the world's traffic goes through a little town in Virginia in the United States. So it got me thinking, how some countries, some groupings control so much of what we have and the digital infrastructure we use. And then I thought about the debate that's going on at the moment around Mr. Musk, our famous son. And it's a bit of a controversial topic in South Africa at the moment. And I'm going to touch on some sensitive, I suppose, for other countries, when we say black or white. I was talking to a French client the other day, and they were quite nervous when I raised that, which is something quite special about South Africa, that we still talk freely about this. But Mr. Musk is setting up, or wants to set up in South Africa, and his Starlink satellite service is a really, really excellent product. I've used it. I was traveling through central Mozambique in December, and it works seamlessly. There's a little problem, though, that we have. I don't know if it's a problem. I think it's more of a solution in South Africa. And it goes to this whole geopolitical thing. Every region has its little nuances. South Africa, of course, has a long history. And when it comes to licensing in South Africa, our laws require satellite service providers, telecommunications providers to have 30% Black ownership. I say Black, the term that our legislation uses is HDG, historically disadvantaged groups. This, of course, has got so many people up in arms because people are saying reverse racism, etc. They want to be like Michael Jackson, like it don't matter if you're Black or white, but it does matter. So some have said Kenya, for example, did away with their requirements for foreign ownership in 1919. And why doesn't South Africa do the same? So we have our own issues here that we need to resolve. And that is why we still have laws that require ownership of 30%. Now, what if we simply just allow everyone to own our digital infrastructure? Well, we're not going to be remedying the issues of the past. People say, Kenya, look at Kenya's example. Kenya has an entire generation ahead of us. They got independence in 1963. We got independence in 1994. We've still got a lot of fixing to do. So each region, in my view, has its own issues. Again, the geopolitical issues. So what happens if we don't fix our digital infrastructure? Somebody else is going to own it. Somebody else is going to own our satellites. Well, we have very small ones, CubeSats as they call them, our fiber lines, our wireless networks. And if somebody else owns it, we're not going to be benefiting our own people. We're not going to be allowing issues of the past to be remedied. So my perspective is that we need to make sure, not only in South Africa, but across Africa, that when it comes to digital infrastructure, when it comes to our data, which Chloe and Nanjiri touched on a little earlier, that we have some control over it. We control where it goes, how it is used, and how it's monetized. And you might be thinking, well, this Lucian, is he smoking his socks or something? But Chloe and a colleague of mine have written an article, a paper, I should call it, that talks about cross-border transfers of personal information and data. And in it, they've done the research. I haven't, I'm a humble lawyer. They confirm that most of our digital infrastructure, Chloe, you can come in a little late and correct me if I'm wrong, but most of our digital infrastructure digital infrastructure and our data is held in foreign centers. So I ask myself, well, why don't we control it ourselves? Why aren't we monetizing it ourselves? And that is something that we need to resolve. At the moment, there are discussions going on across Africa. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement is being discussed. We have the digital protocol. And what we need to do, in fact, as Africa, is we need to put these laws into place. And many of them are still being talked about, and some countries haven't signed up, and we have an inconsistent approach. which leads to countries like South Africa being a little more possessive over data and not allowing it to move into other jurisdictions like the South African Customs Union or even further. We've got a lot of treaties that still were signed in some 2002 before we had privacy laws across or requirements for privacy laws. So that's part of the reason why we don't have data flowing so freely across Africa and allowing us to exploit it and to grow. So from that perspective, what do we need to do to resolve these issues? We need to sort out our laws so that we have a free flow of data across Africa. And more importantly, we need to start investing more in our digital infrastructure. We can't have situations where everyone else owns our data centers, our fiber lines, and as I mentioned, our satellites up in space. If we take control of them ourselves, then my view is that we're going to be able to exploit it more, and we're going to see the benefits that come from using data, for example, in large language models, advancements in artificial intelligence. All of that will be taking place here, as opposed to in some other country that will reap the benefits of our data and our infrastructure. So just to go to the point of working together, getting all our treaties sorted out, which they aren't, they're very disparate at the moment. I'd like to end off with another African proverb, and it's basically, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go further, go together. So as Africans, we have to come together, sort out our treaties, make sure that we're able to transfer data freely around Africa, and make sure that our infrastructure sits here and not in some other jurisdiction. Thank you.
Thank you, Lucien. Yeah, I think, it's probably easier said than done, as you realize. I mean, in terms of the ownership of data, and I think when we talk of data, we speak about personal information and financial data, etc. We also shouldn't forget about our biodata, our that sits in our natural forests, etc., that are being used and exploited. So this is it's a big problem, but it's the first part in any problem is recognizing that it's there, so that we can solve it. So now we've heard about, we've got the African perspective, and we've heard about from a European perspective, and we'll end off today with Dr. Saroj Bishnoi, who's going to talk about the Indian perspective, and his topic is technology, geopolitics, and India's quest for tech self-reliance. It's an interesting point. I mean, we always think that India is a leader, right, in the field of technology. But clearly there are, of course, issues there, geopolitical issues as well. And Saroj, are you online? Is you online?
Yeah, I am online. Here I am.
Oh, great. Please go ahead.
So, just a second. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah.
We can't see you yet, but we can hear you. You can carry on.
Yeah. Just I am sharing my PowerPoint. Just a second.
Okay, all good. We can see you. We can see your slides.
Okay, fine. So, first of all, I would like to thank the entire team for organizing this important event and giving me the opportunity to speak. So in my presentation, I'm going to focus on, as rightly pointed out, technology, geopolitics, and India's quest for technology self-reliance. The presentation has 6 slides, 7 points that I am going to point, the top 7 key points. The first is on geopolitics of technology. Much has been already said about the geopolitics of technology. So I'm going to just highlight some of the key issues which I think not been spoken. The first point is that the role of technology emerging and the emerging and critical technologies has significantly increased the various sectors now transforming profoundly social, economic, military and geopolitics and all that. Because of the increasing role of this technology, the the technology competition and rivalry is taking place, where the major powers especially are competing to develop and deploy these technologies. So the technology war between US and China particularly very clearly visible. So now if you see the US side itself, it has brought a range of policy measures they become self-reliance in technology, and also to dominate in this technology area. The first is of chips and science sector, and also the critical and emerging technology strategies, and a range of other policy measures it has brought. And also it is also taking into account the key allies and partners on its policies. So it is basically trying to become the dominant player in this technology area. On the other hand, if you see the China under its made in China policy and also the 14th five-year plan, it has it is also aiming to become the dominant player and become self-reliant in technology. If you see, the various reports are coming out. For example, the Welfare Center published a report in 2021, which say which highlighted the key areas where the China has already leading out competing USA. For example, the 5G technology, AI, quantum. Similarly, the Australian-based ASPI also brought up which tracks the technologies in 2023 report. It has highlighted that China has already the leads 37 out of 44 technologies, emerging technologies. So the key point that I would like to highlight here, the role of the geopolitics of technology, is that it is critically important to understand the role of technology, global supply chain, how the technology, geopolitics and technology taking place around all that. So my second point that I would like to highlight is the global supply chain crisis. Global supply chain crisis, the COVID-19 disrupted all of Now the ongoing Ukraine war and also the West conflict in the greater West Asian region, and the conflict conflict over Taiwan. All these things are affecting the global supply chains, and this ongoing the competition and rivalry between the great powers affects the strategy and disruptive and this development of these technologies. So, but now if you see the Gartner's report, which has highlighted of 8 technology areas which are going to be very critical, and major powers are the investment and the focus will be on those 8 areas like AI, ML, IoT, and data analytic. And but the prioritizing this, given these technologies are still evolving, and the future also going to have major impact on these things. So the it is very difficult to becomes very difficult to decide the prioritize the trends in these areas. So now coming, if you look at this ongoing geopolitics and the tech war, India has been to overcome this global any disruption in future disruption. India has brought a series of policy initiatives and has also reformed various sectors like the defense sector or the space sector, which because of that now it is attracting global companies to invest in electronic sector like Apple, Foxconn, Samsung, and Lenovo. They are already started investing and manufacturing in India. India also launched this start-off initiative, semiconductor initiative, which is now setting up of 5 fabs in India, and also in the defense sector also it is partnering. So with the various countries and also for JV. So now, if the third point that I would like to highlight here is that India's India's quest for technology has in last 10 years, if you see, have significantly increased because of the increasing, the demand for this emerging critical technologies. If you see the electronics, India is already importing 73 more than 73 billion electronics goods, and India is a major importer of arms, and India sets 9.8% of global the arms market. So a role of because of this increasing demand for defense and other strategic technologies, India has prioritized to develop its technologies. So it seeks to basically the set of a science technology ecosystem in the country, and it aims to achieve technological self-reliance and position itself among top manufacturing countries and to integrate into the global supply chain. The basic objective of these policy initiatives and the huge investment that it is making in various sectors is to shift the global value chains towards it, and it wants to develop world's dependency on India. Now, if you look at the electronic sector itself, India's manufacturing in last 10 years significantly increased. From the electronics manufacturing in 2016 2015-16 financial year, it was just over $37 billion. But last financial year, it crossed $100 billion. In terms of export of electronics, from financial year 2016, it was just over 5 billion. Now it is more than 26 billion. Now, now the share of India's in the global electronics is very minimal, but it is steadily increasing. Now India also, the electronics has also is a big generator, a huge generator of the jobs in India. Currently, it employs more than 2 million people in the electronic manufacturing sector, and now the government aims to increase this part into the coming years to up to 5 million. Now, if you see the technology, the roadmap of India's electronics manufacturing, it aims to manufacture 300 billion by 2026, and here the mobile phones is going to be covered more than 40% of total manufacturing. If you see the 10 years back, 2014, it was almost importing 80% of global, the mobiles. Now, 0.4% only it is now importing. Most of the mobiles are now manufactured in India. So similarly, other sector, IT sector, strategic electronics, industrial electronics, wearables, in other sectors, India is planning to increase massively in this manufacturing sector. In the semiconductor sector, if you see, the India in 2021 announced a big, the financial incentive under the PLI scheme, and nearly 10 billion were announced to the support 50 support to this initiative. Now now the India Semiconductor Mission 1 is going to come to now, is concluding, and India Semiconductor 2.0 is now going to commence very soon. Now, so under the India Semiconductor Mission, which the India ISM, which is a nodal the institute which coordinates the entire semiconductor mission plan. It has now they organized 3 events in the last 3 years, and the initiatives is now the Prime Minister himself leads this initiative himself, and many cabinet ministers have also made their commitment to this initiative. Now, comment on the defense sector, if you see defense, the India is generally known as a major importer of arms, but now India is now exporting the major defense items to more than now the 100 countries now. So now India's share in terms of global arms market is very still very minimal. 0.2% only it constitutes. There is a huge scope for exporting defense items. So now the private sector has significantly also 2000 India in India private sector was not a part of defense manufacturing. Now 2000 the private sector came for the first time, but last 6, 7, 8 years, if you see, private sector now playing very major role. In last 8 years, in fact, the 68 to 98% of total defense export comes from the private sector. Now, the government of India is now trying to establish a defense manufacturing ecosystem where the government, academia, defense tech, and the private sector are increasingly collaborating. So now the space sector, if you see, now India has demonstrated recently, India's space power capabilities. For the first time, it launched the moon Chandrayaan-3. It's a moon mission, which is landed in the moon's south pole. It is a historic achievement. Also, last year also it launched the solar mission, which is known as Aditya L1, to study the sun. Now the Gaganyaan mission, India's first space, human space flight is now scheduled for the next year. So even if you see the space economy in India, now it is currently it stands at $8.4 billion, which is expected to reach 44 billion by 2033. Now, in the space sector, important things also took place, See, the startups have now, only one startup was operating in 2014. Now, more than 180 startups now playing critical role in the space industries. And they have, in fact, attracted more than 1,000 crore of investment in the space sector. Now, the Digital India, another area, which is one of the flagship program of the Prime Minister Modi government. And 2015, it launched this Digital India program to provide digital infrastructure as a core utility to every citizen, governance and service on demand, and digital empowerment of every citizens. So under this Digital India initiative, several initiatives has been launched. One is Aadhaar scheme. Under the Aadhaar scheme, it created a 12-digit number, it created identity. Now, more than 1.35 billion the population of India enrolled on this Aadhaar. EPI, which is now the monthly, if you see, EPI transaction, total transaction is a monthly transaction exceeds many of the the GDP of many countries, in some of the even the European countries. And another initiative is DigiLocker, which is where the the citizens can deposit their they store their valuable documents. E-hospitals, also more than 750 hospitals they have been onboarded on the e-hospital, where a citizen can they book their slot and they treat. And during COVID, many countries struggled to vaccinate their population, but the co-win app, which a fintech developed, in India, that facilitated vaccine as of now more than 220, the pro vaccination under this co-win. And similarly, e-Pathshala, DigiYatra, all these initiatives, now improved the ease of living in India. So now the government of India has, they extended this Digital India program for another till 2026 year. Now startups, in last 10 years, which was launched in 2016 in India, startups now is playing very important role. Now it presents more than 1.17 lakh startups operating in India. In fintech sector itself, more than 10,000 startups now working. And in the space, other critical and emerging technologies area, more than 4,000 startups are working on various aspects like AI, QT, IoT, robotics, and semiconductor, and many others. At present, more than 110 unicorns now have in India, with total value more than 350 billion now. So now the fourth point that I would like to highlight here, India's efforts to establish the science, technology, and innovation ecosystem in India. If you see the India's startup STI policy,
Roj, can you
just
just
to couple of
speed it up
minutes,
a bit?
just 2 minutes. So startup under the STI policy, it is now various missions has been launched, like a quantum mission, space mission, and many other various more than 25 technology hubs established. Aim of these initiatives is to make India self-reliant in various technologies, and huge each sector financial incentives has been offered. Now, if you the global ranking, now last year it was in the Global Innovation Index report 40. Now this year it is improved one more, and now it ranks in 39. So globally also it is making very important progress. Now, if you look at the now the coming to the fifth point of my presentation, that is on increasing strategic technology partnership. Under India's technology diplomacy, it has developed partnership with various countries. With USA under ISET, 2023 last year it was launched, and they are cooperating in various areas. Similarly, the fintech cooperation with at present 7 countries, it has now established a fintech cooperation. Similarly, UAE on with the European countries, or the Quad countries, with the G20 countries, or under the BRIC, under the BRIC. So various countries, it has developed technology partnerships on various critical and emerging technology areas. And in the last year, Bio Summit was held in India, where the more than 100 countries are participate in this event. It provides the opportunities for the academics, particularly to do research in our institutions, leading institutions. Now, the major challenges, if you see, India has done a lot of progress in recent years, but there is still a lot of challenges it faces because of the ongoing geopolitical, the conflicts. So now, one of the challenges is, this is technology dependency. It is still, and technology transfer is not happening. Are developing IPR right. India's 20% engineers design chip for the foreign, the companies, but there is no IPR, and also the synergy, the investment is private sector is not coming. So finally, if I on the future perspective, if it's now India is seen as in a geopolitical sweet spot through its various policies and reforms it has now, and investments, and is improving the ease of doing business, so that it is attracting various the tech companies. Now the last point that I would like to highlight here, that the various initiatives that have been launched, like a deep digital public infrastructure, or the semiconductor mission, or the quantum mission, or the AI mission, or the space area, or defense, each of this sector, there is huge opportunity for the countries to partner, especially a huge opportunity for the global South countries who can join and because if you see the global tech competition, the major power, the investment that are coming from the developed nations are huge, but the global South countries, they are, if they can come together, the at academic level or the industry level, or they can do a lot of progress in those various sectors of technology that India. And so I would like to stop here. I will take any question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, Saroja. Apologies, but we are running out of time. It's a very interesting talk, and interesting to see how India is leveraging its intellect as well as its economic muscle to try and drive its development. And it also faces, of course, the geopolitical pressures, and as always has. And so, it's something that perhaps we in Africa can take cognizance of and figure out how we plot our way forward. We've got some time for some quick questions. We've got questions from the online audience, and also that were placed in the registration, but they were largely covered by the speaker, so I won't repeat those questions. Is there any time for a quick question, perhaps from the? Yes, please. There's a microphone coming to you.
Thanks. So my question is primarily for Nanjira Sambuli, but Chloe and Lucian touched on similar concepts. If Nanjira is still online, I just wanted to say how much I appreciated her focus on our need to leverage our resources, not only raw materials, but our data as a resource. And we heard from a lot of the speakers about how we need to control and own our data and our technology networks. But I want to pose the challenge that I think that horse has bolted. We face a reality where a few powerful foreign corporations already control vast reservoirs of our data. Most of the world's current data flows and the technology that's driving artificial general intelligence that's being trained on those data reservoirs is in their hands. So I study law. In my view, GDPR and its African clones springing up all over the continent, and even the AI Act and the Digital Markets Act are not going to effectively address platform accountability. Or what many of you may have heard of Shoshana Zuboff's concept of surveillance capitalism. So my question, in short, how do we respond politically and socially to this imbalance in power? Thanks.
Okay, thank you. That's
It's a very easy question, isn't it? And I like that you framed it as responding to it politically, because I think at the crux of that is that question. But first, I think that we used the wrong analogies around data. This idea that data is the new oil is actually created this idea that there's a scarcity. When it comes to Africa specifically, and looking at how AI has sort of turbocharged this demand for data, there's still so little it actually can offer us about ourselves. So even just a definitive history of a topic from any African context is not something that has been captured, in as much as there are all these troves of data. So when I talk about this renewed data rush, it's really going deeper beyond just consumption on how you use devices, to really forms of knowing being captured and then being replicated to build these systems. So we have something deeper here that introduces a new opportunity on how we think about how we're ordering ourselves, both for the continent or, for ourselves, and also how we are as citizens or players in the world, which brings questions about what of our own instruments of governing, concepts. So, for example, one of my favorites to point to is that we often don't refer to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is the only human rights instrument that has really tried to balance this language of rights and duties, for example. So that when we're talking about accountability, both even within our local jurisdictions, with our actors locally, but also with the platform accountability issues broadly, we are showing how our, subsequent laws like our GDPR clones, as you're saying, are talking about the duties that these actors have in our countries. In Kenya right now, we have a landmark case ongoing around whether these Meta can be sued in a jurisdiction like ours. But interestingly, I haven't seen other African countries sort of following this and seeing how the subsequent jurisprudence that is set can be something that scales on a continental quest for accountability. This has been was actually occasioned by the fact that a lot of data annotation, content moderation work is being outsourced to the continent. And that with that happening, but without the accountability mechanism for who you're working for and the kinds of harms that our workers and especially Africans were being exposed to as a result, has really occasioned some really interesting work there. So how we actually use opportunities like that to talk not just about a local context, but in a sort of like continental scale, is really ways that we start building towards this idea of where, in as much as the horse has bolted, we still have a horse in the fight, so to speak, because it's not a foregone conclusion that this is the future that we must be subjected to. I mean, I could go on and on and on, but I hope that at least gives a flavor of how we need to really think about how we frame our political and social conversations on this.
Yeah, this is a much deeper topic than we have time in 2 hours to delve into. We're an information systems and technology department, just to put some perspective. But it seems to be that this is a far bigger political issue than a technology issue. The technology we understand. Well, certainly I do, and I think my colleagues here understand the technology. But the politics, the human aspects are the deep issues. And one of the points I want to close with, though, is we sit in fora like this and intellectualize the issues. But the best way to get democracy of thought or is to get everybody educated in the use of these technologies. Why we could sit at universities and in our companies and our corporates and discuss these things. But if the bulk of the people are still not educated or trained or understand that this is their data, this is their resources, etc., then they get manipulated, whether we like it or not. And I think we become part of this problem. And so one of the points I don't think we made here, I don't know, perhaps the speakers have made it, is about data democracy, about digital democracy, about making everybody aware. I don't know if that's in the interest of politicians, though. An educated electorate is a wise electorate, and that's a problem. So and I'll leave it at that. But we don't want to get involved in that. But again, this is a forum. This is perhaps something we can think of extending. We had many of our law colleagues who had signed up to come to this seminar, but I see perhaps I recognize one, maybe there are 1 or 2 others. But perhaps we can host another session, more focused on the legal aspects or the political aspects of the geopolitics of technology. But thank you very much. Thank you to your speakers, and I'll hand over to Upasana to close up. Thank you. So, yeah, go ahead. Just a quick question.
Yeah, time management I was talking about. But nevertheless, my perspective is more from a corporate sector. And in listening to all the presentations and understanding where we are positioned currently, one of my questions is, why is it there's such a close coupling to geopolitics and tech or digitization? From a corporate perspective, we've started technical capabilities and advancement and digital implementation more than 12 years ago. And and many multinationals in South Africa, from a corporate perspective, are very much in an advanced phase of new technological capabilities and digitization. And in none of the projects, to the many projects that we've implemented, we just go on idea, concept, methodology, trial, test, and implement straight on, head on. And I think the gentleman there in the center, you encapsulated a lot of the sort of points in that regard in a good space. And I'm just trying to understand how much does the entire political scenario in any geopolitical environment pulls back this type of advancement and accelerated implementation.
Yeah, I think the point was made, right? I mean, I think Chloe made the point, and I think Nishal made the point as well. Regulation stifles innovation. In the corporate sector, you have less regulation, you have more control over your end outcomes. But in the political arena, in the real world, you don't have that, and that fundamentally is, I suspect, what the issues are, and that is what I think all of our speakers have touched upon. And yeah, in the corporate space, you say 12 years, I don't know which corporate you're in, but I mean, the corporate space has been innovating for a much longer time than that. Your particular company, perhaps, but all of the innovations we see come from the corporate space. But when they start impacting on the public space, that is where government gets involved and to try and regulate the process. And regulation is important for the protection of the population. But again, as I said, our politics colleagues and our legal colleagues would be able to answer that better if we had more time. And but we don't. But thank you for that. I think it's a good point. But all you're doing is reinforcing the points made over here already. Upasana?
Thank you, everyone. Sorry, we're really running out of time. The venue needs to be used by another group. So as we bring this enlightening business breakfast to a close, I thank all of you for attending the session, for participating and your engagement. A special thank you to all our esteemed speakers who have shared their wealth of knowledge with us today. Each of you brought a unique and invaluable perspective to the session, and we are grateful to you for your contributions. We would like to invite Mr. Avishai from AAA for Pilots to hand a token of appreciation to Mr. Kiru Pillay. Kiru, please, can you come to the front? In the meantime, Mr. Ngobeni, please, can you come forward? Come onto the side. You need to take those cords out from there.
Sorry, is it possible?
Yeah. Mr. Ngumbeni for Nishal, please. And Sinegugu from our Tech Society at UKZN will hand over the token of appreciation to Lucian. Okay, I need to place on record our thanks to our Dean, Professor Matula, who unfortunately could not be with us today, and the UKZN PR office for supporting and sponsoring this event. We also want to thank our PR team, that's Hazel, Tandi, and Ayanda, and the rest of the college PR team for the logistics, marketing, and planning assistance. Thank you to the DCCI for their assistance in marketing. To our audience, both face-to-face and online, thank you for joining us in this crucial conversation. As we continue to explore the intricate links between technology and global geopolitics, I hope today's session has provided you with new insights and a deeper understanding of the challenges and opportunities ahead. We look forward to seeing you at future events, and thank you for attending. Have a wonderful day ahead.
Yeah.
And nothing lasts forever. I say good. I. Yeah, I say good. I.